I have four supplementary questions for Senior Minister of State. Earlier in her response, she mentioned that I was not correct to categorize the arrangements reached between Keppel and the Singapore authorities as a three-nation plea bargain agreement. What we read, however, from the statement by CPIB and the AGC in December is that this deferred prosecution agreement in the US was reached, of course, with the US government, but in discussion with Brazil and Singapore. And as part of that global resolution, Singapore was issuing a conditional warning to KOM here. So my question is she actually saying that these agreements that we have reached with Keppel for the conditional warning were not taken in consultation or as part of arrangements with the USA and Brazil, which seems to be what the statement is implying, and that we reached it independently, and we could have actually gone on to prosecute KOM if we had wanted to. It would not be in breach of any global arrangement. So that's the first question, whether we're completely free to decide whether to prosecute or not in these discussions with Brazil and the US. Second question is, she mentioned in her response that the conditional warning, of course, carried certain undertakings from KOM, which were closely aligned to the undertakings in the US agreement, but she did not really specify whether they were coterminous or whether there were variations. So I'd like her to probably give some examples of some of the key undertakings that we have included in the Singapore agreement with KOM. The third question is, in her roundups or in her response, she mentioned that by reaching this arrangement, we would have achieved much more than we could have on our own. Now, the CPIB and AGC statement say that KOM is being given a conditional warning in lieu of prosecution under the Prevention of Corruption Act. I'm not sure whether the Senior Minister of State in her response was actually saying that it would have been quite difficult to successfully prosecute KOM because, the evidence was overseas and so on and so forth. In which case, then, it's a question of whether this in lieu of prosecution really means anything here. And finally, of course, I think the government would be aware that there's been much interest in this case. And, looking at what's been happening to Keppel as a GLC, as a corporate entity, given the large sums of money involved and the damage to our reputation, people perceive that they're just being given a slap on the wrist, whereas it's a daily affair that individuals who are not well connected, they are prosecuted for corruption offences involving $10 or $20 and they go to jail. So I'd like the government to respond to that, because I think there is some public concern about this, what is perceived to be some lenient treatment being given to KOM.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, I thank the member for her questions and the opportunity to clarify certain things. Her first question was whether I had, in my reply, suggested that the actions taken by the AGC were not done in consultation or coordination with the other authorities. I did not say that at all. Let me just read what I actually said. I said that there was no three-nation plea bargain agreement. What happened was that each jurisdiction acted under its own domestic laws, but in coordination with the two other jurisdictions. What I was trying to explain is the legal basis or the legal concept behind it. Because when you say three-nation plea bargain agreement, it suggests that there's either some kind of agreement or treaty to which all three countries are party and we're acting under the same instrument. That is not the case. What I was seeking to establish was that each country is acting in accordance with its own laws. But even whilst acting in accordance with its own laws, they reached a coordinated global resolution. So that is what I said in the main reply, and the intent of it was to explain the underlying basis, which is that each country is actually acting in accordance with its own domestic laws. That is why in the US, they're acting under the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, and they are using the DPA mechanism. In Singapore, we use a conditional warning and the PCA, and of course in Brazil, they had a leniency agreement. So that's all that was being said in relation to that. The second question was in reference to the main answer, where I said that the terms of the conditional warning were closely aligned, and Ms. Lim wanted to know whether it was coterminous and essentially asking what are the terms of the conditions. It is not our practice to disclose terms of conditional warnings, not just for Keppel, but for all cases. So in other words, conditional warnings are things which have been given in the past by the agencies, but as a general practice, we do not disclose its exact terms. What I can say is what I have said, which is that it is closely aligned with what has been done in the US. The third question was whether we have when I said that we have achieved more than if we were acting on our own and acting in lieu of prosecution. And if I could just clarify with Ms. Lim, her third question, what was the purport of that?
Yes, sir. What I was asking was that the Senior Minister of State had said that some of the considerations in such transactions which take place primarily overseas and whether we decide to prosecute locally is, for example, whether our local authorities might have difficulties getting the evidence or witnesses locally. That's what I understood her to have said. So my question was that when the CPIB and the AGC say in their statement that they are giving a warning in lieu of prosecution, is it a real risk of prosecution, or is it a case where there will be difficulties and that's why we are saying that we're not prosecuting them, but in reality, the case will be difficult to mount?
Oh, I thank the member for her clarification. In this particular case, since Keppel has actually come forward and cooperated, it has, in effect, as a company, the company has admitted its part in this. So the next question that comes or that arises is, do you prosecute or do you give a conditional warning in lieu of prosecution? And in this particular case, it was decided to give a conditional warning in lieu of prosecution because of the factors which I had outlined earlier. But the point I was making when I talked about being able to achieve more than we would otherwise would have been able to do if we proceeded solely ourselves is for any number of reasons. But first, the maximum fine under the Prevention of Corruption Act is $100,000 per charge. So this wouldn't get us anywhere near the penalty under the global resolution or even Singapore's share of the current penalty. And with respect to disgorgement, there will be issues of which country gets what. So under the global resolution, what it means essentially is that we're able to achieve all the things that we would have been able to do with prosecution, but even more. And in addition, under the USDPA, there's requirements for an enhanced compliance program. So all of these are things which that we have obtained, which is more than what we would have been able to obtain if you proceeded solely under the DPA. That is what I meant by that. Then let me proceed now to the last question, where Ms. Lim suggested that, people may be getting off lightly because it's a conditional warning. Now for this, I think it's important to understand that there are actually two different things. First, there's the company. Second, there's the individual. Insofar as the company is concerned, it is not a light thing at all. They have not got off lightly. They paid something to the tune of, in the DPA it says $55 million worth of bribes. They have been slapped with a penalty of $422 million. That's something like 8 times whatever they would have paid out. They have been subject to an enhanced compliance regime. They have, as I've pointed out, we've actually achieved more than what we would have been able to do if they were prosecuted solely under the PCA. So very clear, and the company itself has obviously taken remedial actions. So as far as the company is concerned, make no mistake, there has been a heavy price to pay, and deservedly so. With respect to the individuals, as I explained in my earlier reply, investigations are still ongoing. That outcome has not been determined, Nobody has got off or not got off, as the case may be. That is something that the public prosecutor has to decide, and I have explained some of the challenges that the public prosecutor is facing in terms of getting the evidence, but that is something we have to let the PP deal with independently. But let me just say one other thing on this, which is that it is not a matter of letting individuals off lightly. We have, in the past, taken actions against people irrespective of their status. We had, in the ST Marine case that I mentioned, all seven individuals were senior management, including former presidents of STM. There was Patrick Lee, he was the former group financial controller of STM. There was Ong Teck Liam, former group financial controller. Han Yu Kwang, former chief operating officer. Mok Kim Wang, former senior vice president. Tan Mong Seng, former president commercial business, STM. Chan Chong Tek, former president, STM. Si Long Tek, former president, STM. Government officials and politicians have been investigated in the past by CPIB and charged. These include the Minister of State, Wee Tun Bun, sitting and former MPs, Pei Yu Kok, Chu Wee Kiang, a SEDF Commissioner, Peter Lim, an NKF CEO, Titi Dure, and a Deputy Chief Executive of PUB, Choi Hon Tim. There was a Cabinet Minister, Tay Chang Wang, who took his own life after CPIB started to investigate him. So there's no doubt about CPIB's record, and there's no doubt that we will take action if there is cause to do so.